Ladies and gentlemen, this Gaming Silicon video, we're going to be discussing the Xbox One's die pictures which have popped up on the internet. Now I have got an article which has links to these photos so you can actually see them in comparison to the PlayStation 4 as well. What we're primarily going to be focusing upon, however, is just how much of the space of the die the ESRAM actually takes. It's pretty damn humongous, which isn't exactly to be unexpected. However, it certainly impeded the amount of GCN cores that the Xbox One could have. We're also going to be answering another question which a few people have been asking me recently, and that is, what is this 47 megabytes of onboard memory that Microsoft continue to tout, let's use that word, for the Xbox One's APU. So let's tackle one thing at a time. Now I'm going to blast through these figures fairly quickly. Once again, there is an article with all of this stuff written down, so it makes things such as numbers a hell of a lot easier, which is one of the reasons that I do articles. But we're going to go through it anyway. 32 megabytes of ESRAM. That's obviously what's taking up a lot of the space on the APU. We've got 4 megabytes of level 2 cache for the CPU. That's split over 2 modules, so that's 2 times 2, 2 megabytes per each module for the AMD Jaguar cores, and up with the CPU cores. You've got 512 KB of level 1 cache total. 1 megabyte shape memory. By the way, the shape is the audio processor of the Xbox One. You've got a further 512 KB for the level 2 cache of the GPU. Bear in mind that the Xbox One's GPU, specifically the level 2 cache, does not feature volatile bit. We'll go into that in just a moment. You've also got 768 KB total for the GPU for local data share. 96 KB for the scalar data cache, once again on the GPU, and finally just about 3.1 megabytes of GPU space for the compute units. So if you add all of that together with the addition of buffers, geometry engines, redundancy and everything else, that gives you 47 megabytes. It's not anything to particularly become excited about. Don't get super excited. It's not like there's this secret hidden bit of memory on the Xbox One. A lot of that, for example, the level 2 caches are exactly the same for the PlayStation 4. There's not anything, super exciting. It's of course very important for performance, but it's certainly not this touted secret source which seems to be becoming almost a bit of a meme by itself on the internets right now. So much of the space that was utilized for the ESRAM is of course not being used for the PlayStation 4 for the ESRAM, if that made sense. It was pretty poorly worded by myself, but I'm sure you got it. The PlayStation 4 instead, because of the GDDR5 memory, doesn't need this ESRAM. Therefore, it's allocated much of the space to extra GCN cores. So the Xbox One features 14 and the PS4 features 20. But 2 for each one is disabled. So 20 becomes 18, 14 becomes 12. The reason it's disabled is just purely because of yields. In other words, it's very unlikely in the laws of probability that you're going to have, let's say, in the case of the Xbox One, you're going to have 3 GCN cores fail. On the other hand, there's a good possibility that you might have 1 fail during manufacturing, so it just makes sense to build in some redundancy. I know what you're going to say, well, what about if I'm a lucky person? What about if my Xbox One or my PlayStation 4 has all compute units working? Well, my friends, you are treated equally. There is no shyness for you. Your console will still perform exactly the same because it's locked down in software. So it literally doesn't matter if your console is one that has 18, 19 or whatever. It's locked down, so just forget they exist. They're purely there for the purposes of manufacturing. So in terms of CPU speed, we can see that the Jaguar cores, unsurprisingly, take up pretty much exactly the same amount of space as you'd expect. Both Jaguar cores also, of course, feature the same amount of level 2 cache. They also feature the same amount of level 1 cache. Pretty much everything's identical, including the fact that they're, of course, out-of-order execution. Both AMD Jaguar x86-64. The major difference is that we believe the Xbox One's CPU is about 150 MHz faster. That puts it at about 10 G-flops extra in terms of computing performance. I'll say that again, at G-flops, 10 G-flops, not T-flops, G-flops, because CPUs do not have as much oomph as the GPU. That's just how it works. Think of the CPU as the brains of the operation, and think of the GPU as the grunt. In other words, it does most of the heavy lifting, especially when it comes to compute. So most of the primary difference, as you can see, is actually focused upon the ESRAM and the actual GPU itself. The Xbox One's actual GPU enjoys a lot less performance than the PS4's. You've got 1.32 T-flops versus 1.84 with the PS4. That's simply because of the extra GCN cores that Sony have managed to cram onto the die. Despite the fact that the Xbox One's GPU is actually clocked at 53 MHz faster, so it does enjoy an extra speed boost in that regard. It's just not enough to make up for the discrepancy in terms of the amount of compute units available. Now, I did mention earlier that the PS4's GPU, in terms of other bits and bobs, does have a few extras. For example, it does have the level 2 volatile cache, which, by the way, AMD have actually implemented to modern GPUs, for example, the Volcanic Island range. Basically, it also has a much improved compute structure. Now, volatile bit basically allows you to selectively delete / modify one line of code which is stored in the level 2 cache. Meanwhile, improved compute structures allow you pretty much to be able to execute code much more efficiently when it's actually being held for the GPU to process at a time where it's not processing, say, graphics commands. So let's say there's a compute command where it has to, I don't know, calculate the difference between X and Y. Let's just make something up. And that's a compute command. It has nothing to do with textures. On the PlayStation 4, it will have more of a chance to be able to actually execute those commands much more efficiently because it has not only additional aces, 8 versus 2, but it also has many more queues. I've got an article which actually goes into a lot of in-depth, so if you actually click on the link, there's actually another link inside this article where it says click here for more information on ACE/compute structure, and it will pretty much bore you with all the information that's available. It's a literal plethora, crap ton, and it also shows it versus the modern day AMD GPUs, and you can see just how much of a similarity there is. Finally, the PS4 also features double the amount of ROPs and an additional amount of texture units. So you're looking at 32 versus 16 ROPs and 72 texture units versus 48 of the Xbox One. So as you can see, Microsoft, when they decided the ESRAM route, really pretty much limited themselves on what they could do with that SoC, with that APU, simply because there's only a finite amount of space. You can't make, you know, the APU to be like 15 feet big after all. Okay, of course I exaggerate, but you get the idea. There's a finite amount of space, there's a finite amount of power you can pump in, there's a finite amount of heat that you can dissipate, so on and so on. Sony could have easily have lost this. They could have easily have ran into a situation where GDDR5 memory was prohibitively expensive. They could have easily ran into a situation where they just weren't able to cram enough memory in, especially with their budget. After all, eventually they ended up getting rid of the PlayStation Eye bundle, and instead they used that money to put in more GDDR5 memory. In fact, it was a decision made so late that even the developers weren't aware of it until the actual PlayStation conference. So you could have easily had a situation where the Xbox One would have had 8 gigabytes of DDR3 and the PS4 would have had 4 gigabytes of GDDR5, and then I think the cross-platform games would have been a very interesting situation. Obviously in that case Sony would have had no choice but to go for a very light and small operating system to reduce the memory footprint. As it is, they have a lot more leeway than what they do now. Microsoft also could have gone a slightly different route, even if they wanted to stick with DDR3. For example, they could have chosen to go with a daughter die. Now, pretty much just means it will attach to the main APU, and they could have used something like 64 or 128 megabytes of memory for this ESRAM if they'd have gone with the, or should I say EDRAM, if they'd have gone with this daughter die scenario. It would have meant higher cost, but they could have traded this in by saying, you know what, we're going to get more compute units. So, for example, they could have gone with 14 or they could have gone with 16. And with an additional amount of ESRAM, say 64 or 128, they might have been able to have gotten away with it. Regardless, hopefully you've enjoyed the video. It's been a bit of a whirlwind tour, but there you have it. So I'll see you soon. Take care. Bye for now.